Everyone loves a good side character. The Sasuke's, the Zoros, the Vegetas, all great side characters that fit very well with their protagonist counterpart. Then we have the side characters who completely steal the show. When a side character is more developed, more interesting, has more impact on the story, and is just more involved in the story than their actual MC counterpart. I'll be going over 3 of the best examples that I could come up with where side characters basically become the main characters. The first character is Satoru Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen. The first thing that is established in Jujutsu Kaisen is the rivalry between Sukuna and Gojo. This rivalry is the main rivalry in the series. And right off the bat, Gojo and Sukuna both become fan favorites, which in turn makes this rivalry the biggest and best thing about Jujutsu Kaisen. So within legit the first episode, the protagonist, Yuji, is already being pushed to the sidelines. Like, have you ever seen an anime or manga other than Jujutsu Kaisen where the main character isn't a part of the main rivalry in the show? Naruto and Sasuke, Goku and Vegeta, Guts and Griffith, hell, even Asta and Yuno. Yuji does have a rivalry in the show, but it is nowhere near the main rivalry in the show and does not even come close to being as good as the rivalry that Gojo and Sukuna has. Gojo legit steals the whole entire show at the beginning of Jujutsu Kaisen, really until he is sealed away in the Shibuya arc. All the best moments are when Gojo is involved, and the whole entire story basically revolves around Gojo. Because Gojo is such a threat that the main antagonists at the start of Jujutsu Kaisen, the Disaster Curses, plan all their course of action just around Gojo because he's that overpowered. Their whole entire plan was to basically just seal away Gojo and take Shibuya, but mainly seal away Gojo. Because Kenjaku knew that he could not go forward with his true plans unless he got rid of Gojo. All the focus in the story is just around Gojo, and everything that our characters really do has to do with Gojo, where he is, what he's doing, etc. Our group of antagonists do take some interest in Yuji, but the only reason they're interested in him is because he's Sukuna's vessel. And to sideline Yuji even more, Gojo gets his own arc, which is the Gojo's past arc. Of course, in this arc, this is where we see Gojo as a teenager, this is where we see him fight Toji, and this is where we also see him fail the Star Plasma Vessel mission. And up until this point, Gojo was just some overpowered badass who acted silly all the time or didn't take things that seriously. But this arc gave us so much more complexity and depth to Gojo's character and made him more than just this overpowered, goofy character. While Yuji has barely gotten any depth or complexity given to his character, he hasn't even been given a curse technique, which is the most basic power or power-up in all of Jujutsu Kaisen, and we're about 80 manga chapters deep or 30 episodes into the anime at this point. And it's actually insane how we're this deep into Jujutsu Kaisen at this point in time, and we know more about a side character than the actual protagonist of the story. And right after the Gojo arc, we see Gojo, of course, get sealed, and he basically goes missing for about 100 chapters. But because Gojo is pushed to the sidelines, there's more opportunity for the other characters to finally shine, especially Yuji. And let me just say, Yuji finally cooks, man. He cooks in the Shibuya arc. He finally acts like the protagonist for once in the story. And you probably think to yourself, oh, this is going to keep going on and on until Gojo returns. But no, Yuji gets sidelined again after the Shibuya arc. He gets sidelined by characters like Yuta, Yuki, Maki, and the list could go on for a little while. In the next major arc, the Calling Games arc, this is where we finally see Yuji back in the spotlight for a little bit. He has like one really good fight at the beginning of that arc, and then he really just does nothing for the rest of the arc and is completely irrelevant. And to top it all off, at the end of the Calling Games arc, Sukuna leaves his body and enters Megami's body, and Megami becomes the vessel for Sukuna. Which, one of the things making Yuji relevant to the story at all was the fact that he was Sukuna's vessel. So when Gojo leaves Yuji's body, he basically just becomes irrelevant. And right when Sukuna takes Megami's body, Gojo returns and we see the Sukuna versus Gojo fight. Gojo ends up losing and he ends up dying. Rip the goat. So now that Gojo is permanently out of the story, now would be the perfect time to finally get Yuji in the story and have him do something as a protagonist. But no, he's still sidelined, as Sukuna runs a huge gauntlet with pretty much every single side character going ahead of Yuji, because at this point in the story, Yuji is just way too weak to go against Sukuna. Like, we're in the final segment of the story, and this man has not been given a single power-up when all the characters around him have. And it's not until Sukuna legit kills and just beats every single character in Jujutsu Kaisen that he finally fights Yuji, aka we finally see Yuji do something in the story, and Yuji finally gets a power-up. In the last 15 chapters of this manga, the protagonist finally gets a power-up. But the thing is, we don't actually know what that power is. We don't learn anything about Yuji's power, we don't know any details about it. He just gets it, and then with the help of Megami and Nobara, he ends up beating Sukuna. So Yuji felt like the MC twice during Jujutsu Kaisen. He felt like the MC during the Shibuya arc, and then he also felt like the MC towards the end where he beat Sukuna. While Gojo felt like the protagonist of the story from start to finish, like even after Gojo died, Jujutsu Kaisen just wasn't the same. Like, Gojo is what made this story great. Another really good side character is Prince Zuko from Avatar, who is also the second example of a side character basically being the protagonist. I was going to keep this list to anime characters only, but I decided to make the exception for Zuko, as Avatar isn't an anime, but it's close enough to one anyway, so yeah, I'm going to talk about Zuko. It's pretty clear right off the bat that Zuko is the protagonist in Avatar. In season 1, we follow two POVs. One POV is Aang, Sokka, and Katara, and the second POV is Zuko's POV. And season 1 is really just a cat and mouse race, with Zuko chasing Aang for the entirety of season 1. Zuko is not a fan favorite character in season 1, but he's still a good character nonetheless. Season 2, on the other hand, is where Zuko really starts to steal the show. In season 2, Zuko plays a completely different role in the story than he did in season 1, with him not really going after Aang, him separating from the Fire Nation, and really just finding out what his purpose in life is. He doesn't play a huge role in the main story, and most of his scenes are pretty laid back, with him just traveling, him chilling out with his uncle Iroh, or him just living a normal life in Ba Sing Se. While Aang is basically the whole entire focal point of the season, he is involved with the main story all the way through. Even though Zuko is not really a part of any of that stuff, he still has the best scenes in season 2 and is the best character in season 2. And I just want to make this clear, this is not the same situation as Yuji and Gojo, where Yuji basically just completely irrelevant for majority of the story. Like I said, Aang is the focal point of the first 2 seasons, a pretty good protagonist. It's just that Zuko really does start to steal the show in season 2 and start to feel like the protagonist at this point in the story. And going into season 3, Zuko was by far the best thing about this season. He has one of the best redemption arcs I've seen in fiction. And of course, in season 3, Zuko's redemption arc is at its all-time best. Learning to firebend with love instead of hate, coming to realize how much he loves his uncle and how important of a father role that Iroh really played in his life. And just everything about Zuko in this season, in season 3, is amazing. His conclusion, his moments, the man just steals the show and really does push all the other characters to the sidelines. Aang technically was the focal point of season 3, with him saving the world, defeating the main antagonist. Zuko was still a huge player in the season, of course, but he did kind of all the side stuff by beating his sister and becoming the Fire Lord and saving the Fire Nation. But even with Aang doing all the main important stuff, he never was as good of a character as Zuko was. Zuko had such a insanely good character arc, insanely good dialogue, insanely good moments, while Aang just never had any of that stuff. But now moving on to the third and final character I will be talking about in this video, Shin Ashikura, I don't know how to say his last name, but Shin from Sakamoto days. Now, a lot of you are probably pretty surprised that Shin is on this list, Because unlike the situation with Gojo and Zuko, where there is a established main character, and then of course Gojo and Zuko are established as the side characters, and then they end up just basically stealing the show and feeling like the MC. In Sakamoto days, the protagonist is not really established in the story. Like, there's no established one protagonist in the story. At the very start of Sakamoto days, we follow the story from Shin's perspective. And this goes on for an arc or two where most of the focus is just on Shin. The second arc in Sakamoto days, the lab arc, is mainly about Shin and his backstory and just learning about him and who he is as a character. With there being little focus on Sakamoto, and it kind of stays that way for the first couple of arcs. Most of the focus is on Shin, with Sakamoto kind of just being there with Shin. It's not until the JCC infiltration arc that we actually start seeing Sakamoto's perspective and start like learning about him as a character. So you could honestly make the argument that Shin is the actual established protagonist. The only reason you would think that Sakamoto is the protagonist is because, one, the anime is named after him, and two, he is the face of this anime. But on the Sakamoto Days official wiki, it is stated that Toru Sakamoto is the official protagonist of Sakamoto Days. And if you go on Google, it says the same thing. So Sakamoto is the official protagonist. But it's super concerning that I even had to do research in the first place about who's the protagonist in this story. Like, it should be pretty damn clear who your protagonist is when you're making a story. And this really just shows how outshined Sakamoto is by Shin and just all the other characters in this story. There was a recent popularity poll for Sakamoto Days. Nagamo got first, Shin got second, and Sakamoto got 8th. The fact that he got 8th when he is the protagonist of this story is just absolutely crazy. And it makes sense, to be honest, because Sakamoto is honestly just a overpowered badass. Because there's not a whole lot of depth or complexity to his character. I'm going to bring up Gojo again in this video, but as I mentioned earlier, at the start of Jujutsu Kaisen, Gojo is just known as this overpowered badass who is silly and goofy all the time. But as we get more and more into the story, we actually come to learn that Gojo is a really well-written character and he is really complex and deep. On the other hand though, Sakamoto doesn't really have anything like that. He kind of just stays the overpowered badass for the whole entire story, and he never really gets any development or depth or anything given to his character. Sakamoto does have his own arc, basically just like Gojo's past arc. Sakamoto has the same thing where we go back in time and we see Sakamoto as a teenager and we see him as a assassin. But he is still outshined by the cast of characters surrounded around him. Characters like Nagamo and Rion steal the spotlight when it comes to this arc. So as a whole, a lot of characters in Sakamoto Days just are more interesting and better characters, honestly, than Sakamoto is. And it honestly feels like Sakamoto is pushed to the sidelines. Exactly the same situation as Yuji getting pushed to the sidelines by all the side characters in Jujutsu Kaisen. And going back to Shin, Shin is the best written character in Sakamoto Days, and I will stand by that. Especially in the latest arc of Sakamoto Days, which is the jail arc. Shin during this arc was amazing. He gets so much more depth and complexity to his character, and during this arc he was at his best that we have seen him for the whole entire series. But of course that comes at a cost, as Sakamoto kind of gets pushed to the sidelines again, and this arc is mainly just focused on Shin. And it is really a shame because Sakamoto is such a lovable character. He's the type of character that you can root for, and Sakamoto definitely has a lot of potential to be a really good character. He just feels very unexplored as a character. And of course, the author could decide to explore Sakamoto as a character moving forward in Sakamoto Days, but Sakamoto Days is in its final arc or final segment of the story right now, and we're 200 chapters into the manga at this point. I feel like the author would have already explored Sakamoto as a character, given him depth and more complexity if he really wanted to.